Township Planning Commission meeting of March the 14th, 2019. Kelly, can you take roll, please?
Mr. Capuzzi.
Here.
Mr. Reardon.
Here.
Mr. Galman.
Here.
Mr. D'Amelio. Mr. Fiordemondo.
Here.
Mr. Poynton. Mr. Russo.
Yeah, I'd like everyone to rise and join us with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first order of business this evening is 924 Haverford Road, final land development plan for Pets First Veterinary Center, LLC. Floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, Jim Greenfield for the applicant. You'll recall that we were here, I guess, about 3 months ago for preliminary plan approval. We since went up to the Board of Commissioners and got approval of the preliminary plan. And I think you've probably seen a copy of the resolution that was issued by the board. We're now back on final plan. And we received the revised copy of the engineer's letter today. And I'm going to introduce at this point Dan Meyer, who can take you through where we are in terms of responding to the comments and things of that nature.
Good evening.
Good evening.
If you want, I can just walk through the few comments here.
Please.
Yeah. First one is about the sewage facilities planning module. We put in an exemption request. I just spoke to Mr. Faulkner tonight. They're reviewing that, and when they're done with that, he'll get it back to me, and then I sort of send it down the chain of the sewage facilities. So that's in progress.
Excuse me, Dan, this is Cobb's Creek watershed?
Yes.
Yes, you-
Yeah. Second one, we submitted to PennDOT. Got some comments back. Really, the only significant change they made is we originally had 15-foot radii coming in off of Haverford Road, and the driveway was 24 feet wide, and requested that we make these 25-foot radii and make it 26 feet wide. That's really because, you know, Haverford Road, 4 lanes, 4 narrow lanes, you're kind of flying down that road, and then
I'm sorry, Dan. You're going to
have to dive in off the road to get into the site, or leaving the site. It just makes it a safer entry and exit. So that's really the only significant thing. We've resubmitted, and we're waiting for any next round of comments. The next 2 items are referring to the proposed lower level courtyard, and I've been working with the architect and his MEP engineer. I'm going to say that's at sort of a 90% design level right now. We're just working out the fine details, but we've got a design in place, and that'll be submitted shortly. Number 5, there's a little bit of confusion, and I take responsibility for that. So when we originally submitted, we were looking at 3 waivers. One was for utilities within 400 feet of the site, and we requested that we just show them in Haverford Road and the sewer along our rear yard. The second one was, one second. That was for providing a location map with property lines, streets, and zoning information within 2,000 feet of the site. And the third one was regarding street lighting. And we requested the street lighting waiver because there's already 2 street lights on poles along the property frontage. So then what happened is, as we were looking at the zoning map to put that information on our plan, we realized all the properties were on the Haverford Township zoning map. So we just took a little snapshot of the zoning map and put that on our plan. I could show if you'd like to see it. So I took that waiver off the plan, and during that time, Mr. Greenfield had had some conversations with township staff that they felt the sidewalk wasn't necessary at this time. I'll let Jim expand on that if necessary. So I added a waiver for the sidewalk. So just some miscommunication on my part, and what in hindsight, what I should have let Pannoni know that we had made that change so that they would have seen it the last time around. So that's the discrepancy that he's referring to in question number 5. Question number 6 is just about a water quality filter insert that we're putting in our inlets, and Chuck's asking that we just check that it's going to function properly. It's not going to interfere with flow through the pipe. So we've looked at that, and we'll provide some backup information on that to show it works.
Okay, thank you. Bob, do you have any questions, comments?
No, I do not.
I have one concern, and that concern is the sidewalk. But I'm going to leave that up to Angelo to discuss.
Thank you. Okay, we had a discussion before you left last time about sidewalks.
Yeah.
And I thought had a consensus that it wasn't a problem that you guys were going to provide it. I believe you made that statement specifically.
Yes, that's true. I think subsequent to that, I had a conversation with Kelly. We talked about the need for it at this time. I think we all know that it would be a sidewalk to nowhere for now. And I think we recognize the possibility that at some future time, the township is going to want sidewalks along that stretch of Haverford Road. So what I would suggest to you is that if you're not comfortable giving us the waiver on the sidewalk requirement, what we would agree to is a condition that if any property contiguous to ours is required to put sidewalks in at some point in the future, we would do it.
Okay? I'm not going to comment on that right now, but that's an option that we have, obviously.
Okay.
Is there anyone in the audience, and before we begin, I'd like to recognize Mr. Lewis, the Fifth Ward Commissioner. Mr. Lewis is here this evening. But are there any residents who would like to speak at this time? Yes, sir. Please come to the podium and give us your name and address.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Silvio D'Angelo. I live at 904 Haverford Road. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak.
Excuse me, you're immediately adjacent to this property?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. My wife and I own the residential property immediately adjacent to Pets First. We also own 908 Haverford Road, which is next to that, and we live in 904 Haverford Road. 912, my grandfather built that in 1953, and that's been in our family ever since. My mother was widowed, so I maintained 912, and I bought the house right next door to her so that I could keep the family going. So I'm a lifelong resident of 912 Haverford Road. We outgrew 908. Only had one bathroom, so we bought the house next to that. So now we have 3 houses in a row, and I intend my children move in and enjoy the properties when they settle down with husbands. Our properties and Pest First properties are located in R4 zoning district for low to medium density residents. In 2017, I received a certified letter from Pets First explaining their application for zoning relief to build a 9,000-foot plus square foot building, hospital, 18 feet from my front door, 912 Haverford Road. That application was denied. June 7th, 2018, the Hydes were granted zoning relief to build their current building. Now, that current building is being built on 2 residential lots that, my grandfather, my mother, my father, and myself thought would always be residential lots. And we enjoyed that view. At the zoning meeting, the Hydes submitted a plan that showed no fence. The fence was never mentioned. And that's the zoning plan that was approved by the zoning board at that time. After the 30-day appeal process passed, the Hydes removed 4 trees right on the edge of my property and erected the fence without contacting my wife or I. They just put it in. As shown in the photos, this fence is plastic and a pale tan. The fence is over 7 foot 6 inches high in 2 areas, and the majority of the fence is over 6 foot 6 inches. The fence was placed right on top of a 10-foot stump, and at that point is where it was 7 foot 6 high, as per the documents that I showed you. The stump is right in front of my front door. So I look out my front door and I see the stump in this fence that's 7 foot high, and it's literally right across the driveway, 8 foot from my step. In addition to being an eyesore, the fence is a problem for the driveway. It is a risk to be hit by vehicles backing out of the garage or turning around in the driveway. On Haverford Road, people come in the driveways, turn around and go out if they're going in the wrong direction because it's such a high-speed road. I don't know who comes in and out. I have no control over this fence. And the way you have to turn around, the fence is right in the way. It really restricts the turnaround. When you park your car in the driveway and open your door, you are right up against the fence and will need to close your door to get around the car. It just has a very claustrophobic feel from my driveway and from my house and from my porch and from every view. In the event of a fire at 912, the fence location will prohibit a fire truck from safely navigating 912's driveway. And the firefighters will not be able to exit the vehicle safely due to the fence's position. This is going to hinder them getting out of the truck. The Haverford Township fence ordinance clearly states that the erection of the fence cannot constitute a fire hazard. Clearly states that. And that the fence can't be over 6 foot tall. Although the fence is technically on the boundary, it only impacts my property. The Hydes property will be screened by new landscaping from seeing the tall plastic fence. Because the fence makes my property less attractive, I am concerned that my property value will go down, and the rental value will go down before I sell the property, if I sell the property. A better location for the fence would be along the Hydes' rear property line. They could remove that fence and use it, so it wouldn't be cost prohibitive for them. The back of the property, as Mr. Greenfield stated, is going to have a fence anyway, so they can use it there, up against SEPTA Trolley and the Pico Power Station line. I understand why the Hydes want to have a fence up during the construction period. I want to be reasonable, and I'm willing to support the land development application for the commercial use, but I think it's only reasonable that my property should be supported at the same time. That my property should be supported at the same time by Haverford Township. Okay? The township that I've been paying taxes for and I enjoyed and grew up in, went to Haverford High School. I love my township. I really do. I'm begging you guys to see some, light here, please. A reasonable solution would be to allow the fence to remain up for the construction period. I understand they want to protect their construction site, and I'm okay with that. Following the construction, the fence would be removed or relocated to the rear of the property. I appealed to the Planning Commission to recommend that as a condition of approval, the fence be removed following construction. The fence can still be utilized across the rear of the property, and everyone should be happy going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Finton McHugh. I'm with the law firm of Petrick and Wellman, D'Amico, Brown, Petrosa, and Media, and I'm representing Silvio and his wife, Mara. I felt that it would be better if you heard that from him rather than me asking him questions or any of that. It just comes better from him. The only thing I wanted to add is that, essentially, just looking at this thing from afar, the fence is basically going to be their fence, and they don't want it. I know it's on the property line, or maybe 6 inches inside the property line, but once the evergreens fill in, they're not going to see the fence. They're going to see the fence. They don't want the fence, and I think they're being reasonable and not otherwise opposing what is a pretty substantial commercial development next to their residential properties, and all they're asking for is one minor reasonable concession from either the developers or, if not from the developers, from the township, is to just ask that the fence that's going to affect them, not them, that they're not going to see, be removed after construction. And we'll leave it open-ended as to if it takes 2 years to construct the thing, it'll stay up for 2 years. But obviously, it's an ugly fence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, there was one other point that Mara was good to bring up, is that it was not in the plan at zoning, that it was not shown on the plans. It was not referenced in the zoning hearings where they were at. So this came as a surprise to them when unannounced it showed up. And it was also not on the current plan. So it's not that, this is just something that kind of just showed up, and it's something that can just as easily, I think, come down. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a 6-foot fence for the most part. I see where you came up with that large number because you measured from your driveway up and did the other stuff, okay? But the ground actually goes up in those places, and I understand that. So generally speaking, is this within the confines of what we allow in a township? And is this something that we have any say-so over?
I have not seen the fence. I spoke to the D'Angelos and offered to send over an inspector to go measure the fence and see if it meets the code and is in compliance. We do have a maximum height of 6 feet. It does seem to change with the grade, which many fences do, but without, actually going out and having someone measure it, it's kind of impossible for me to say.
That'd be terrific. When could they come out?
I could ask somebody if they have a minute, tomorrow to go take a look at it and make sure that the height is okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You folks have anything to say, or?
We do. I don't know if the Planning Commission wants me to respond now or after any other comments that come up. Do you want to hear other comments before I respond?
Okay.
I can do it either way.
Now we can do that. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lynn Elliott, 704 Polo Road, just across the street from where this is going to be built. And I am nowhere near as charitable as my neighbors. I think it's phenomenal that they are okay with this being built. I'm really just continuing to object to the fact that a non-conforming business on a residential lot has been allowed to expand to more than 3 times its current size when code allows only a 50% increase. More than 3 times. It is going to be a 6,000 square foot commercial veterinary hospital being built on a residential lot only 25 feet from a residential property, when a commercial veterinary hospital is not supposed to be closer than 150 feet from a residential property. I think that is a terrible precedent to set in this township for a non-conforming business to be allowed to more than triple its size when code allows only 50%, and to have been allowed to move 100 feet across their lot from where their current building is. They are supposed to build adjacent to their current building. They cannot because of the sewer line, but code says they only have to stay 10 feet in front of that sewer line. They should have been required to build on the same side of their property as their current building is. This is detrimental to the residential neighborhood. Where they're going to be sited is right into the most residential portion of this part of the neighborhood. And I think it's a really bad precedent to set. I think it's bad for the residential neighborhood right around there. We are under assault from commercial interests all the time, and this is yet another example of the continuing commercial intrusion. This is surrounded by residential property, adjacent on both sides by residential property, and it's a commercial 6,000 square foot veterinary hospital that's being allowed to be built there. I object in principle to that. In addition, once these owners are no longer there, the last building lasted for 90 years. It went through several veterinarians over the decades. This building is going to go through several veterinarians, probably commercial, corporate veterinary interests are going to purchase this at some point down the line. It could last another 90 years. What kind of protections is the Planning Commission, the Board of Commissioners, going to put in place to protect the residential neighborhood from the increasing commercialization down the road? The Hydes have said that they are not going to put in outdoor kennels. Well, I think that's wonderful. Is somebody down the line going to want to do that? Is there something the Planning Commission can put in place to say no outdoor kennels are going to be permitted at any point if we grant you permission to build this? They have said they are not going to operate outside of their current business hours, which only go to about 7 o'clock, something like that, on a weeknight. They're not open Sundays, only a half-day Saturday. Is that something that can be put into place that will carry forward to future owners of this building so that the residential neighborhood will be protected from the greater commercialization by a subsequent owner? That it won't be used as an emergency veterinary hospital at some point in the future. What kind of protections can this board put into place? Because frankly, as residents, we depend on you, our officials, to protect our interests. We can't hire killer lawyers. Well, sorry, my apologies. You're a latecomer to the whole proceedings. So we depend on you guys to protect us as much as you can with this. We fight as best we can, but we depend on you because you're the ones who give permission for all of these things to be built and to go forward. And I wasn't able to be here in December, but I listened to your hearing in December on this case, and I didn't hear anybody talk about the buffering here. And I know there are going to be trees planted between that property, but, you know, having dogs myself, the first thing dogs want to do when you get out of the car, they want to pee everywhere else every other dog peed. Where are the trees going to be? In the front yard, in the parking lot, so that dogs will stay on that side and won't go just to where the trees are over on the side next to the D'Angelo's property. We want to see what is in place to protect us, to think about how this is going to be used in the future. So thank you very much for allowing me to object once again to this proposal.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Did you attend the zoning hearings? on
Oh,
this
I
thing?
sure did.
Okay, and did you raise all these points with the zoning board?
We went through iteration after iteration, and absolutely, the zoning board upheld our first case. They denied them the first year, and that was the 9,000 square foot building. When they came back with the 6,000 square foot building, the zoning board decided that that was acceptable to them. You know, it's a matter of, if you don't win at zoning, as the Board of Commissioners, when I objected at their meeting, they said specifically, we depend on our zoning board, we depend on our planning commission to make those decisions. So we're here trying to state our case as best we can, and we can't go back to zoning. We don't have the money to fight an appeal at zoning.
Right, just so you know, this board cannot react to use, okay? We can only, the use of the property as far as being non-residential is controlled strictly by the zoning board. If they If evidence is presented to them or they feel that the use is appropriate, even though it's a residential district, and they say that, then this board can't negate what the zoning board says. And that goes for anything related to the business, or its hours of use and things like that. Now, the township does have probably some general noise regulations that say you can't make noise during certain periods of time, or you can't operate during certain periods of time. But all that's in the township code, which again, this board does not control. So
So
I
like
understand-
outdoor kennels, that's not something you guys could even address?
That's how the use of the property is
But they are
governed.
specifically forbidden from having, at this point, from having outdoor kennels, am I correct?
We did represent to the zoning board that we had no intention of having outdoor kennels, and I think the zoning board made its decision in part dependent upon our compliance with the testimony and the evidence presented. So we understand that we're bound by that.
And your approval is based on that testimony, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So any changes to that testimony would theoretically require the zoning to react to changes and give us another opinion.
Sorry, Jim, I don't mean to push
No,
you. I'm
okay.
trying to make sure I get to, but that, and I'm sure Pets First doesn't have any intention of doing that. I guess my question is, this is going to keep going on for decades, this building, and they will eventually sell to someone. Does what Mr. Greenfield stated at the zoning board hearing, does that carry forward to a new owner of the building?
It certainly has in the past in Delaware County. And to point out one, it is specifically that when St. George Hunt, who was a close friend of mine, became quite ill and ended up knowing that he was not going to live much longer, he sold his business. They were never allowed to have outdoor kennels. When he sold his business to a new group in Delaware County, it's in Wayne, it's in Radnor Township, specifically, they were also told no outside kennels. So it has, and he bought that property from another person, and he wasn't allowed to have outside kennels. And so that stayed the way it is. And so I know what transpired in that case. Now, that was 8 or 10 years ago, but it hasn't changed.
Well, that's great to hear, and may I also, and I don't know if, Jim, you want to state this on the record, but I submitted the Pets First hours as an exhibit at the zoning board hearing, and they stated at the zoning board case that they were not going to expand outside those hours. Does that carry forward to a new owner, that they cannot expand the hours? I mean, will you state for them that that is what you stated?
The same reasoning applies. Whatever is in the testimony that was before the zoning board that we represented is what we understand we're bound to do. And we understand that if a subsequent owner were to try to change those things, the township would have the ability to do something about it.
And we were told last December that the hours of operation, I believe, from 9 in the morning till 7 at night, basically. Is that right? We started 8 in the morning. So we did ask that question last time, and that's what we were told.
And the half-day on Saturday and closed on Sunday and all of that? And then trees, buffering, that's the next thing.
The trees and buffering, again, the applicant presents his landscape plan to the Shade Tree Commission.
Right.
And
Okay.
Shade Tree Commission, all they review are plantings and things like that. So the Planning Commission per se does not get involved in other organizations that the township runs because they're supposedly the experts in that area.
So the buffering that is proposed between the property and the D'Angelo's property is something only the Shade Tree Commission will deal with? It doesn't get dealt with by the Planning Commission? Because I thought the buffering was part of the
We
engineering
defer to
plan.
the Shade Tree Commission. If there's an issue that's brought up in the zoning process, sometimes the zoning board will put a condition in that specifically says a certain buffer has to be planted in a certain location. I don't know if that's true in this case or not. But again, we defer to the expertise on the Shade Tree Commission.
And they specifically also will talk about the types of trees, the types of things that they want to see in the location based on the amount of room there is for their future growth and things like that. And we've had people from owners, Mr. Owner used to be on the Shade Tree Commission. There's a lot of other people who are involved in it, and quite frankly, they do a really credible job.
Have you been to the shade tree? I haven't seen you there.
I didn't go to the last one. Dan Meyer went, though.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if I'm supposed to apologize then for wasting your time, my
You're not wasting our
apologies
time.
if I have done that. As Mr. Reardon knows, I try to protect my neighborhood as best I can, and the residential neighborhood is just continuously under encroachment by commercial development in our area. And we really look to you guys to try to help us out as much as you can. So imagine if this were being built 25 feet from your property.
I understand. The township is currently undergoing a process. They're updating their comprehensive plan, okay? So we need folks like you to speak up during that process, because a consultant might tell us that strip of Haverford Road is ideal for commercial development. So we need input from people like you and other neighbors in that area to step forward when the time comes and voice your opinion how that ground is best used.
As long as Andy sends us out an email about where we're supposed to be, you can bet that at least one of us will show up there to state our opinions.
There's a big article on the front page of the latest newsletter Township just sent out. It was delivered this week.
All right,
So make sure you read it.
will do. All right,
you.
thanks, gentlemen.
Is there anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Greenfield. Good evening, thank you. Mr. Capuzzi, especially thank you for educating us.
I'm
And
sorry,
Mr.
your name?
Reardon, Maura D'Angelo,
For the record.
resident of 904, and was a caretaker of 912 and 908. Mr. Reardon, I want to thank you for telling us about how Radnor Township handled the situation with Dr. George Hunt. His passing was a tragedy for everybody, and
Yeah, it
Radnor
was.
did keep everything nice. We have that same hope from Haverford Township. And I think what my esteemed neighbor, Ms. Elliott, was trying to make a point of was that we beseech you for your protection. The fence that we're here about tonight, not to be petty, we are older neighbors, usually deal with things on a handshake, don't require lawyers, no offense, is that a fence has been erected right after zoning was approved, without any discussion between neighbors, as you would normally think things would, and wasn't in the plans, and is now an eyesore, and quite honestly, will cost us degradation of our property because of the way that it looks. So I think that Lynn was trying in her nicest way to say that we thank you for being here, and we do need your assistance to continue being happy residents. So thank you for everything tonight.
Thank you. Let me address the fence issue. I mean, Township has an ordinance that controls where fences are built, how high they can be built, things like that. I don't think there's anything in the ordinance that says you have to put a chain link fence in, or you can't put a plastic fence in, or whatever. There are requirements on how much of the fence has to be open, I think, but I'm not an expert on that particular code. I will say that generally a permit's required to erect a fence. So the property owner has the right to put a fence up on their property. There's, whether or not their neighbors agree with it or not, unfortunately, that's the way the rules are written. Whether it shows on a plan or it doesn't show on a plan, there's nothing that stops somebody from coming in now, 10 years from now, putting a fence up, not putting a fence up. It's entirely their decision. And this board does not control that particular code section that talks about fences. All I can suggest is that you wait for the inspector from the township to come out and render his decision on whether or not he feels the fence is legal. If it's legal, I don't know there's much that the township can do to help you on that. If it's not legal, then the owners will have to take the necessary actions to make it. But there's nothing that this board can do, or I don't think anyone can do, other than suggest that you try to speak to your neighbor and try to negotiate a solution that's satisfactory to both parties.
I want to add one other thing, that I'm going to say 3 or 4 years back, and correct me if I'm wrong, we had a major look at the entire fence situation in the Haverford Township. And the rules and regulations for fencing changed fairly dramatically at that time. Up until that time, I don't believe, and Commissioner, correct me if I'm wrong, it used to be that we had a 4-foot solid, and then every other space had to be left open for fencing in any location. Some places you could only have a 4-foot high fence, some places you could have partial. They determined that when a property got to be more than, I believe it's 50 or feet wide, at that point in time, 6-foot fences would be allowed, okay, down the sides, across the backs, and up. But if the property is less than 50 feet wide, then there are further restrictions. But after that time, and much of it was as a result of people with large properties and trying to deal with the deer and some of the other stuff that are going on, were trying to make certain that they could have their 6-foot high fences. So having just gone through this and put in new fencing with thank goodness, with both of my neighbors on both sides, we decided to share the cost of it, and we put in new fences on our new home. I know what the rules and regulations were, and I know that the 6-foot high fences, and there might be a post, and I know that we did our best to keep it, along the lines of the property, and it was difficult because there were stumps, and we ended up grinding a bunch of them to try to get everything down to the same level. And so we worked on that, but I am telling you that 6-foot high fence is now, because that is a wider than 50-foot wide property, that is the present day code, and it's changed from when I put the fences in my house over on Millbrook Lane. I've got 4 and 2s, okay? So I know what you're talking about. But the rules have changed.
Actually, if I can make a point, and we understand that the fence might have been legally erected, was legally erected. I know there's the issue about the grading and such, but essentially we're asking for a tightening of the rules. Whereas you might have a situation where, let's say on a particular zoning issue or a land development code issue, it'll say that in this particular area there should be 40 evergreens, but the code didn't foresee that the way the grading goes, they only have to put up 6-foot ones, and on a particular ordinances are funny things, because once you let them roll, they're like vehicles, and they kind of, once they are put in action, you need kind of field changes sometimes, and I think this is one of those situations where a 6-foot fence might make a lot of sense for some properties, but when these evergreens again are filled in, this is something I think where if it's a condition of approval, you have the authority to put it, to require them to do additional things that the ordinance doesn't necessarily specify. That's why we have conditions of approval. And again, this is, I think it's a reasonable ask here for something that isn't affecting them. The buffer benefits them, it does also benefit us, but the fence is obviously what they're really upset about. And this is kind of an easy fix, I think, if after a year this thing gets removed. So it's like the other example I was bringing up, that if there was, if it only called for 6-foot plantings, and because of the grade, it makes more sense to have 12-foot plantings. You can put that as a condition of approval because those are special circumstances. I think these circumstances are pretty special with the fence looking at them right out the door. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
First of all, as a former planning commissioner at one time in Lower Merion about 30 years ago, and then in Radnor Township after that, and as a one-time member of the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee in Radnor, I don't envy you the task of redoing your comprehensive plan. You're probably familiar with the fact that it took many years to get the last one done in Lower Merion. It's a very difficult job, it's a thankless job, and I wish you the best of luck with it. Going back to let me just deal very briefly with the fence. The measurements, as I saw in the photos by the D'Angelos, were taken from the driveway, as I think the Planning Commission has already noted. The terrain varies on the Pets First side of the driveway. And in fact, where it does rise up a little bit is where there's a root system from a tree that formerly had been there and is now a stump. So that's, if the standard is, and I know this to be true from the code, that it can rise to a height of no more than 6 feet above grade, in that particular area, that's where it is. It is 6 feet above grade, and we think the measurements will show that. We did get a permit for the fence. I think the township looked at the circumstances, and I don't know if they examined the fire safety of it, but I can tell you that I don't think fire safety is an issue here in any respect. If there's plenty of pavement in the way of driveway at 912 Haverford. We think there's ample room for any vehicles to turn around in the back of that property. And we're not concerned that the fence is going to become an obstruction. And we're fine with having the township come out to measure it to make sure that it's compliant. We think it is, and we certainly intend to comply with the code. And you're right, Mr. Reardon, about the changes to the fence ordinance. That's only happened within the last few years, and it's a very different and I think easier to work with section of the code than it was as recently as 3 or 4 years ago. And having had a case in front of the zoning board under the old code, I can tell you that we're appreciative of the fact that the township made the change. Regarding the comments that Lynn Elliott made, this veterinary use was on the property more than 90 years ago. The use probably goes back well before then, but there was a structure there 93 years ago for that purpose. As such, the veterinary use predates almost all of the residential uses in that neighborhood. So it's not as though we intend to do something on the property that's out of kilter with what the rest of the neighborhood is doing. In fact, the residential uses came to the area after the veterinary use was already in place, and it has functioned entirely in concert with the neighborhood. And in fact, many of Pets First's clients are Haverford Township residents. Although this is, again, something that the zoning board dealt with, so I don't want to dwell on it, but it's not a 6,000 square foot building under the code because the basement is entirely underground. And because it's entirely below grade, it does not count against the square footage under the township's code definition of a basement. So in fact, it's a 3,000 square foot building. And we have put it in a location and made it of a size that was actually suggested to us after numerous conferences that we had with Laurie Hanlon Widdop before she retired. So this, yes, there were several iterations, and eventually we came around to the view that this was going to work just fine, to put it as far back on the property as we could, to keep it 25 feet off the property line rather than, I think we could have come as close as 10 or 15 feet, but we're much further off the line than that. And we've done this in a responsible way that's consistent, as consistent as possible with code. The variance that we requested, 50% of the allowable square footage that we have an 1,800 square foot building now, could have gone to 2,700 under code. We have an additional 300, so it's an 11% increase above what's authorized, and that was what we got the variance for. So it's virtually de minimis. And as far as the neighborhood is concerned, as I think the Planning Commission recognizes, it has changed somewhat over the years. There have been a number of cases where zoning relief was granted to allow office uses north of this property toward Landover. From 924 and the property across the street, which is an office building, 8 of the 11 properties between that point and Landover are now office uses. So yes, there's a lot of residential to the south of us primarily, but there's also a great deal of office, and in fact, it's a predominant use on that section of Haverford Road. So all this, though, has been decided by the zoning board in terms of what the use is that's permitted. We think we've complied with everything that the township engineer has suggested to us regarding the plans. There are a couple of things we know we still need to work through on the courtyard, and we expect to have that done by the time we go see the commissioners, which we hope will be, with this board's approval, we hope that will be April 1st at the work session. Any other questions that the board, oh, one more thing I wanted to mention, I'm sorry. Yes, the landscaping plan was reviewed by Shade Tree, and in fact, and Dan Meyer can confirm this, because he was there, I was not, but my understanding is that Shade Tree made some specific recommendations regarding species changes, and we have implemented those and put them into the plans. I think you have a copy of the landscaping plan in your package. And so we think we've done everything that Shade Tree has recommended as well. Any questions that you have that perhaps we can answer?
May I?
Let me ask one quick question. Sure. When was the fence erected?
July?
Last
Yes,
July?
July. So it's been up 8 months. Nobody said a word about it until now.
You'll bring it into conformance if there's any problems.
Yes, sure. If the township finds that we're not compliant in any way, we will fix it. Absolutely.
And I appreciate your comments about the changing nature in that area to the north, which is why I am really excited about the fact that you may have the opportunity to put the first sidewalk in, so that then, in the future, it will continue on, because people walk along there. You can see where there is a mark on the verge of the property. When Haverford Road was widened, back when, I live in that neighborhood. So when they widened that road, they took every bit of space that they could take. So the biggest problem that the state has is that they talk about setbacks, but in fact, they widened a 2-lane road to a quasi 4-lane road, and in doing so, took all of the extra space. But we've got to find some way to put some sidewalks in. All right, it's an opinion.
All right, last chance. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
The fence was erected in September, and I thought this was the place to discuss the fence rather than causing a problem. I did call Mr. Greenfield a month ago and ask. He never called me back or came back to me. I thought it was the Planning Commission job to make sure that this project meets, not only the legal, but what the neighbors want, what the people in the area want. There are 2 residential homes right next door to Pets First. And then there's a row of 20 or 14 residential homes to the east of it. Again, this fence can go and not affect them at all. I believe that you would, take my best interest in heart, being that, this is a planning commission. It might not have to be done legally, but you do have the power to make it a contingency. You've done that in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, and I will make a motion that we recommend that the land development Pets First Veterinary Center LLC be approved, subject to the following conditions. First, all the comments contained in the Township Engineer's review letter dated March 13th, 2019, last revised March 4th, 2019, be addressed to the satisfaction of the township. Second, that the plans not be presented to the Board of Commissioners until all the details for the lower courtyard area have been submitted to the township, have been reviewed and approved by the township. Third, that the waiver regarding the construction of sidewalks on Haverford Road be denied. And that's it.
I'll second that motion.
Kelly, can you take roll, please?
Starting. Mr. Capuzzi.
Yes.
Mr. Reardon.
Yes.
Mr. Gelman.
Yes.
Mr. Friedemundo.
Yes. And I strongly urge you to try to sit down with your neighbor. Hopefully you can resolve the issue with the fence, but as I stated before, if the fence is installed legally, there's not much this commission to do to help you with your concerns. Thank you.
Boy.
Okay, next item on our agenda is review of minutes from the December 13th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting. Make a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes last meeting, dated
December 13th.
December 13th.
Second that?
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm supposed to say,
Sorry?
I'm supposed to say all in favor.
Sorry.
We'll do it again.
Didn't want to do roll again, honestly.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.